Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for coming and braving this rather turbulent weather. You're most welcome. I'm Wilmar James, the Federal Chair of the DA, and I'm joined by Helen Ziller, the leader, Musi Maimani, our national spokesperson and Gauteng Premier candidate, and Lindy Mazibuko, our parliamentary leader. We issued a statement last night, a fairly detailed statement, and I'm sure you've read the statement. We will not reread the statement. That would be redundant, and instead what we will do is have Helen make some introductory remarks, and then we'll go to the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Wilmot, and thank you to all of you for being here today. We issued a statement last night. That remains the base statement, and I don't have to read it out to you again. You've all seen it. You've all reported extensively on it. I'll just make a few introductory remarks, and I think what would be most appropriate today is to enable you to ask as many questions as you would like. I will make two core points. The move to bring Dr. Mampila Rampele into the DA in some way or another has been a very long and ongoing process, culminating in our press conference last week. It was a genuine and good faith attempt to bring together a strong and united opposition force that could build a new alternative government for South Africa. That's what the DA is totally committed to, and that is what we were trying to do. And that, too, is what the voters want. That, too, is what the voters want. And sometimes in politics, you have to take a risk. This was a calculated risk, as many things are in politics. Sometimes a risk works, sometimes it doesn't. But as you also learn in politics, success is never permanent. A mistake is very rarely fatal. You have to admit that it was a mistake, cut your losses, and move on. That is what we are doing in the Democratic Alliance, and we would warmly welcome any questions that you may have of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your questions and identify yourself as you do it.
There's a question right here.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi.
Elizabeth, could you perhaps be able to give us an indication as to when did you start realizing that this move was a mistake? Was it only yesterday, or when did you get the impression that it was a mistake? Secondly, if you could just be able to give us, we know that there was the final meeting before that press conference on Tuesday. If you could perhaps be able to give us an indication as to what were the types of discussions between Mampila and yourself. Perhaps maybe did she agree to join the and you went against her word?
Good. Did everybody hear the question? When did I start realizing that this would be problematic? And what was the nature of the discussion between Dr. Rampili and myself before the press conference on the Tuesday? I started getting worried on the Tuesday morning before the press conference because we had two clear and agreed press statements the previous evening. The next morning, Dr. Rampili wanted to rewrite her press statement saying that in a unique South African innovation, she would remain the leader of AGANG and become the presidential candidate of the DA. Now, that had never ever once featured in any of our discussions. And when I saw that in her redrafted statement on the Tuesday morning, I immediately phoned her and I said, Mampila, this can't happen. It is an electoral nonsense. You can't have the leader of one party being the presidential candidate of the other. And in any event, we had agreed the day before that a technical team would discuss the incorporation of AGANG's branches, AGANG's members and its volunteers into the DA. So I said, that is what we agreed. I wrote it down. I read it out several times. We agreed on that. And today you come and say you're going to remain leader of AGANG and presidential candidate of the DA. It can't be. Then we went and met at the Townhouse Hotel, and I said, listen, if this is how you want it, then I'm going out there and I'm saying to the press, this press conference is off. I won't go into details, but I'll say it's off. She then said, no, we can continue. We can continue on the basis of the original statements. And that is when we hit a bump that I thought it had been resolved. And I had to reconsider during the week.
You had a question, sir. Go ahead.
Guten Morgen, aber wir müssen jetzt nur Englisch reden. Okay, viel besser auf Englisch.
Just two questions for you. On the face of it, to many, this would seem like an attempt by the DA to get a globally renowned and steeped in the struggle black leader to represent them in the run-up to elections. You describe it as bad faith on Rampili's part, but how rushed was this? Did you launch into it with eyes open? Obviously, it wasn't a done deal when you appeared in front of the TV cameras and kissed and hugged Rampili into the DA. And this is just as a quick follow-on that. How exactly are you going to get voters to trust you based on what's happened now? There's many undecided voters out there, I'm sure you must know. Now that you've become involved in a partnership that's ended in tears, due to a deal that both the DA and AGANG's rank and file members seem to have not known much about.
Let me say that this was not rushed. I've been talking to Dr. Impellas Rampili since 2010, actually. I was thinking back because she helped me very, very much indeed in getting the merger going between the Independent Democrats and the DA. She was very involved in that with Patricia DeLille and with me, and that process worked very, very, very well. And you'll remember that Impellas was at our press conferences and she was at the ID's Congress, and we worked very well together. And subsequently, I've been seeing her regularly talking about the right time for her to come to the DA and always reporting back about those discussions to the DA leadership. And last year, it culminated in a bold move on our part, which then Dr. Rampili went back on because she said that she didn't think the time was ripe. But she certainly said the time would be right in the future. We retained contact throughout the whole year, and in October, November, she came back to me and said, look, she really thinks the time is coming where we should really make this move, and she'd like to re-engage in discussions. I said, certainly. I realized AGANG was in big trouble, and I felt that at that stage she would be more likely to follow through on the proposal that she made to me back in October and November. We worked through that. Dr. James went into the technical discussions again with Dr. Mulsono, who was working with Dr. Impellas, and then we came to the point at which she put on a lot of pressure to make a move. I met her on Sunday night with a team. Again on Monday, we met in the mayor's office, and that is when we reached an agreement. So from the DA's point, it had been a very, very long time in coming. We had been in discussions over and over again over 3.5 years. And indeed, it was Dr. Rampili who insisted that we have an immediate press conference. It didn't suit me at all because I had a cabinet lechotla the next day, and I said, please, it really is not useful for me to do this. I have other commitments, and she said it has to be tomorrow. And so I wrote down the agreement, I read it twice, I called my colleagues, I said, here it is, the incorporation of AGANG's branches, members and volunteers into the DA with Impellas as the DA's presidential candidate. That was the agreement. So it certainly wasn't rushed, and it was certainly agreed to in principle by the DA's federal executive. I think one of the reasons that it was rushed by Impellas is that she'd started reading things about it in the newspapers.
Sorry, and then just how are you going to get the voters to trust you? There's a question about the voters.
Okay. The voters are obviously important, and the key important thing, the most important thing, and what the voters want more than anything else, and our polls showed again and again, is a strong, united opposition force, a non-racial opposition that has a real chance of becoming an alternative government. That is what the voters want. And I can't tell you how many people have said to me, from boardrooms to shacks, why don't you and Impellas get together? And I've always thought that made a lot of sense too. And I said, I'm working on it. We'll get there, I'm working on it. So in order to serve the voters, this was a genuinely good faith attempt to realign politics and to bring opposition parties together. It doesn't help to have a whole lot of shattered, tiny, splinter parties all over the landscape of South Africa. The voters realize that. You have to be bold to pull those parties together. Sometimes it works, as it did with Patricia de Lille, and sometimes it doesn't, as it hasn't with Impellas Rampili. And I think the voters will understand that. They wanted me to make this move. They wanted it to be a bold move. It had to be a bold move, and it didn't work. During the course of the past week, I realized we could not in good conscience say that Impellas can be the president of South Africa.
Go ahead, sir.
William Bogo at SABC. If it wasn't rushed as you're saying, did you then ask her on the morning why she suddenly had what they call cold feet or decided to go with her own statement? Did you ever ask her why she even thought of doing that? Well, the second question would be, what's going to happen now? Are you prepared to stand as the DA's presidential candidate, or are you then going to look for somebody else?
Thanks very much, Rio. Firstly, we had very good statements worked out the night before. I was very happy with both of them. I called Impellas. She was very happy with both of them, and I thought, okay, we go. Then the next morning, I heard that she changed her statement. There were two changed drafts. I got the second draft in which she explicitly put in the line, in a South African innovation, I will remain the leader of AGANG and be the DA's presidential candidate. I immediately phoned her and said, Impellas, that can't happen. It isn't legally allowed. In terms of the Constitution, if you aren't a member of the party on the list that sent you to Parliament, you cease to be a member of Parliament. And certainly the DA cannot send anyone to Parliament on their list to be their presidential candidate unless that person is on their list. It's electoral nonsense, I said to her. We can't do this. I said, if you're going to insist on this, it's best we learn that now, and then I will cancel the press conference. It's no skin off our nose. It'll be a 10-minute embarrassment. Rather than go into this, let me cancel the press conference, if that is your view. She said, no, we must go ahead. I said, then we cannot go ahead on this basis. It's unconstitutional, it's unlawful, it makes no electoral sense, and will entirely confuse the voters. Now, who's going to be our presidential candidate? That's not for me to decide. The federal executive will decide that. As the federal executive decided by a 2/3 majority that, in principle, Dr. Impellas Rampili would be our presidential candidate, subject to working out the technicalities. Then on the Monday, I agreed with Impellas that AGANG would be incorporated into the DA, its branches, its members, and its volunteers. She very much insisted that her volunteers were put in as well. I said, no problem with that. And that a technical committee would manage that incorporation. And then we had the agreement that the FedEx had agreed to in principle before.
Would you be keen to stand as a presidential candidate?
I'm quite keen to stand where it makes sense for me to stand for the DA. I've currently accepted nomination to be the Premier candidate in the Western Cape.
Okay, thanks. Could you pass the microphone back? Oh, you have one. Go ahead, sir.
David Smith of the Guardian newspaper in the UK. Just a couple of questions. Would you concede that you parachuted with Dr. Rampili in primarily because of her race rather than any other qualities? And do you now regret that? And secondly, how has this affected your personal friendship with Dr. Rampili? Will that remain cordial or not?
Obviously, being black in South African politics today is a powerful message, a very powerful message. But Dr. Impela has a world brand. She has been a leader in many, many institutions, big organizations. She has a worldwide reputation as an academic, as a doctor, and as a manager. She's also black. That is a very powerful combination in the South African context. Very powerful indeed. And we can't say that race doesn't matter and is irrelevant. But certainly if Impela had only been black and none of the rest of the many attributes that I have come to know in her, she wouldn't be under consideration. It was the combination that was important. So that's the answer to your first question. The second question about parachuting and rocketing, well, many people have been parachuted in as candidates for the DA. Many people have rocketed up the ranks. Many of them are risks, but 90% of the risks have worked. Not all risks turn out well.
And so the second question is about your personal friendship now.
Well, I think it's taken a very bad knock, our personal friendship. There's no question. I was particularly concerned on Friday when we had agreed a statement with her word by word, and she later accused us of putting out a different statement from the one that we had agreed with her. Now, that was something that really gave us a knock, and certainly gave me personally a knock, because it accused us of lack of integrity.
Any further questions?
Yes, Situma Stone, Business Day newspaper. Just to follow up on Dave's question, the DA has been accused of window dressing, but perhaps there's another way to look at it, and maybe you can educate us. What is it exactly about black leaders in the DA that so much embodies this idea of non-racialism? And to Lindiwe and Musi, in carrying out your duties and playing your role in the DA, how have you lived and represented this idea of non-racialism? And lastly, to Mzele, don't you think that if AGANG members wanted to join the DA, they would have done so in the first place without going via measures and so forth?
Okay, Helen, the first and third question, and then Musi and Lindiwe, the second question.
Situmo, can you please repeat your first question? I didn't quite grasp what you were asking. Sorry.
Yes, I'm saying, besides from the fact that you've been accused of window dressing, perhaps we could give this whole issue a bigger context. In a sense that, what is it about black leaders in the DA that carries, represents, and embodies this idea of non-racialism?
Okay. Well, the DA has to be the change we want to see in South Africa. And you can't be an organization, let alone a political party, that is fit for the purpose of representing South Africans if you're not diverse. Now, we completely reject window dressing, and I reject the insinuation that any of my colleagues on this platform would be window dressing. They are, as all other people who are in elected positions in the DA, because they are all in elected positions, and they all have the confidence of the bodies that elected them within the DA, we don't do window dressing. We obviously look at achieving diversity, and that's a very, very important component of all our processes, but that is entirely different from window dressing. We look at opening opportunities for really capable and good people. We actively seek to achieve diversity. We ensure that we support good talent in rising to the top, and that is very, very different from window dressing. So we completely reject the notion of window dressing, but we deeply believe in the concept of diversity. Secondly, about the AGANG members, let me quickly say, of course, if people want to join the DA, they would have come straight to the DA. It was Impela who insisted on the clause that we look at the incorporation of AGANG's branches, members, and volunteers.
Okay, thank you. Did you, Musi, did you hear the second question clearly?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Stomo. Yes, okay. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah, that's correct.
I think it's important that we have a better appreciation of the project that South African politics is about. The project fundamentally is indeed about the realignment of politics. It is indeed about the fact that when voters go to the polls and to the ballot box, their vote should never be about this race or that race. It's not a contest between races. It is a contest between saying, this party best describes my aspirations, my future, and that is what I want to see. And so, to answer your question about what does it mean for me to be a black leader within the DA, is precisely the point about saying, we are here to build that project. I believe that my role and that of my colleagues is about making sure that that dream of a non-racial political landscape in South Africa becomes realized. And so, without fail, I carry out my duties not in building a party for blacks, but in building a party for all South Africans. That is the duty that I'm at. And I welcome and I appreciate the fact that I have a leader such as Helen, who maybe in many ways may be different in skin color to me, but we share many of the common objectives and dreams that we hold, in the same way as it would be for Dr. James, Lindiwe Mazibuko, Patricia DeLille, and many others. So I don't stand here and say I am in the DA because I'm a black leader. As much as that is true, I stand here because my commitment is building a diverse political leadership that the best can then be put forward. And that is the duty I must execute, and that is the hope I must present to South Africans.
Thank you. Musi, by the way, you're seated.
Sorry?
I said, by the way, you are seated. You are not standing.
Oh, okay.
Silly joke. Thank you very much. Anyway.
Thanks, Chairperson. Is this microphone working? Yeah. Okay. I think in order to understand the context in which Helen and the DA leadership would have felt strongly about the value of a DA presidential candidate who is not only a black leader in South Africa and internationally, but is also steeped in the struggle for liberation, you have to go back to the road that the DA has traveled since 1994. I think a lot of people, particularly when the ANC punts its propaganda about the DA being a white party, forget that its predecessor party, the DP, when it had 1.7% of the vote in 94, was considered a white English suburban party for, wealthy elite housewives and business people living in Houghton. And Tony Leon took that party, and under the most extraordinary difficulties and against all odds, was able to find common ground between white South Africans of English extraction and white South Africans of Afrikaans extraction, by engaging with Afrikaans voters, by speaking their language, and by saying, just because of my background, I am not necessarily unaware of the challenges that you face in South Africa today. I can still be your representative in Parliament. And back then it was unthinkable for white English and Afrikaans people to be under the banner of the same political party. But when it happened and the National Party in its new format was extinguished, it seemed to be the most obvious thing in the world. And then along came Helen Zille, and she made a name for herself as the Mayor of Cape Town in 2006, and was engaged in a number of campaigns on the Cape Flats, appealing to white and coloured and Indian and black voters in a way that the DA hadn't appealed before. She learned the language Afrikaans, she learned to speak Xhosa, and she too had the message of, I am a white South African, but I can just as much empathize with the challenges that you face in your daily life as any other leader of the same colour as you can. And so the DA became known as a minority party. And now you have leaders such as myself, Musi Maimane, Wilmot James, and other black members of the DA leadership. And it is now the most obvious thing in the world to say the DA is a middle-class party. And so the steps will continue. Every time a new leader has the vision to say, we need to step out into uncharted waters, and we need to show South Africans that against all the narratives of apartheid, it's possible for people to trust each other across racial lines. it takes a bit of vision, it takes a lot of risk, it takes a lot of complex decisions to say to South Africans it's possible to build a non-racial political party that won't simply champion the needs and the issues of the race group from which its leaders come. So this wasn't just about having a black leader in South African politics. There are many black leaders in South African politics. All of my leaders of opposition parties, my colleagues of opposition party leaders in Parliament are exclusively black, and none of them have nearly as much support as the Democratic Alliance do. They don't even have as many black supporters as the DA does. We have more black supporters than any other party besides the ANC in South Africa today. So it's not just about being a black leader. It's about being a black leader in a party which has traditionally had a particular reputation and which is moving towards becoming a truly non-racial party. And I think, had this been a successful merger, this would have been one of those great, important steps towards consolidating the DA's position as the non-racial party which it is, and bringing us closer to that goal of becoming the next national government in South Africa.
Thank you so much. I have 3 hands. There's somebody at the back. First, go ahead. And over there.
Marcel Gordon from TVC News. My question is for Helen Zille. You did say earlier that it is up to the federal executive to decide where they want you to stand. Arthur Trillip was on the radio about an hour ago saying that he was vehemently against the merger or the parachuting, whatever you want to call it. Would you then concede, though, that what's happened over the last week is at least a knock to how your leadership is viewed from within the Democratic Alliance?
In the federal executive of the Democratic Alliance, we have tough and strong debates. Yes, Athol was against it, and he spoke out strongly, as is his right. We often agree on issues, sometimes we don't. And then the FedEx takes a vote. No one can ever guarantee that a political risk will work out. On balance, the FedEx thought that it was a risk worth taking. Now we'll go back and we'll assess why it did not work. And obviously I have to take responsibility. I'm the leader. I have to take responsibility. I have to be accountable inside the party. And we will take it from there. The FedEx will talk about it, will analyze what went wrong, and we will take a decision about who the presidential candidate should be. But as the leader of the party, I proposed Impellas. As the leader of the party, everyone knew that I'd been in discussions with her since 2010, and I've reported back to federal councils and federal executives regularly. And everyone knew that if we could get this to work, it would be a wonderful game changer in South African politics. It didn't, and I must accept responsibility for my role and be accountable, and I will do.
Thank you very much. I've seen your hand, ma'am, but first go ahead, sir.
SABC. Helen, have you spoken to Impellas since Friday? And if so, what have your talks been like? Have they been cordial or acrimonious? And secondly, given the developments, do you think that you'll be able to amass the 6,000 people that you said you would to march to the ANC offices tomorrow?
All right. Yes, I have spoken to Dr. Impellas. You said since Friday. Well, I spoke to her on Friday when she phoned me and said she was really angry because she'd agreed on a statement with the Democratic Alliance, but we had put out another statement. I got a terrible fright. I was in the Southern Cape, and I immediately phoned my office and said, "What's this?" Dr. Impellas phones me and says, "We agreed the one statement with her, and now she says we put out another statement. How did that happen?" They said, "Not at all." So I said, "Please, will you investigate this and find out where the confusion lies?" So they got back to me and they said, no, where the confusion arose was that the Citizen Online had put up an article based on the statement. And obviously they put their own words in. They don't just republish the statement verbatim that the DA put out there. And so she had confused an article based on the statement with the statement itself. So I got back to her and I said, Impellas, we sent out exactly the statement that you'd agreed to. What you're quoting now is the Citizen's analysis of the story and of the statement, not the statement. So that caused a big flutter, And by then she'd already put on her Facebook page, and it was all over the newspaper, that we had allegedly agreed one statement with her and put out another one. And so I spoke to her about that, and I said, look, this really can't work this way. We have to act with integrity. And then I spoke to her again last night.
The march.
The march.
Yes, the march.
You will recall that the Johannesburg Municipal Police Department turned down our permission for the march. And we decided to take an urgent interdict against that decision. But because it was going to cost a lot of money to transport people and take other actions to ensure that people who wanted to march could march, we decided that we would wait till after the legal processes before going ahead. Because if our appeal to the magistrate for an interdict didn't work, we would have to take it to the High Court and further. Because we're absolutely determined of threats of violence, and there were repeated threats of violence from the ANC Youth League, from COSATU, from South African Communist Party and various others, that we would be attacked, physically attacked, if we came near Luthuli House. Now, when there are threats and unconstitutional threats against people's constitutional rights to march, then we obviously have to defend the Constitution and challenge that in a court of law. But we weren't sure that our first attempt at an interdict with the magistrate would work, and if we had to have an extended legal process, it would take time, and we would then have wasted money. And we are very, very careful with money in the Democratic Alliance. So we decided to postpone the march pending the legal process's conclusion. Fortunately, the magistrate immediately said, you've got an absolutely good case, these threats are unconstitutional, and the Johannesburg Municipal Police Department had no right to turn down your permission. So in fact, we succeeded at the first base. The magistrate said, trying to stop you marching is unconstitutional, you have a right to march, and the police cannot stop you.
Thank you. It's really important, colleagues, to understand very clearly that the statement that was issued on Friday, past Friday, committed Dr. Rampela to three things. It committed her to a press conference that would have been held today, where, based on the drawing up of a memorandum of understanding, and that memorandum included the details around the technical committee that was supposed to do the important work around the merger. Firstly. Secondly, it would have, at the press conference, we would have formally welcomed Dr. Rampela and AGANG members, formally welcomed them. And thirdly, we would have created the space around the timetable for the conclusion of the technical committee's work. And that statement, I sat on with Dr. Rampela in the morning, very early in the morning, together with our CEO, Jonathan Mokes, to conclude that statement, and she agreed to that statement. So it's a really, really important statement. And then on the basis of her agreement, that statement was released. That's the statement to which Helen refers. And after we released that statement, she then changed her mind and issued a counter statement denying that on Facebook and also on the AGANG website. So you need to understand the importance of that statement.
I just want to comment on just the previous question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have requested the chairperson just to make a quick comment about the perception around leadership. I think it's critical to note the fact that, and I think it's important for me to put it on record, that Helen Zille took the opportunity to open the Democratic Alliance in the true principle of an open opportunity society. That opportunity is the same for Dr. Rampela, it is the same for Mmusi Maimane, it is the same for anyone. And so it becomes a critical point to put on record to say that opportunity means that for Helen Zille, her own self, to be able to put forward the vision for South Africa, even at her own expense, means, to me, an indicator of the caliber of leadership that the Democratic Alliance is under. And that's a critical point to put on record.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mercy, at the back. I can't quite see. Go ahead now.
So, Alexandra Brangin from Radio France International, that's the French Public Radio. Just wanted to know if your party truly feels ready today to go to these elections, and what are you telling the voters to convince them of that you're a coherent party? Thank you.
Well, we are a very coherent party. We are the only party with a viable and very powerful machine. We have internal institutions that work very well. We've got a brand of being outstanding in opposition and good in government. And we're a party that governs 30 municipalities around South Africa, a province, a major city. And we're the only viable alternative to the ANC. We're trying to grow that party, no question. We know in the DA that we are in a race against time, or shall I rather say that South Africa is in a race against time. We are having the truly ghastly spectacle of seeing our constitutional institutions eroded. The National Prosecuting Authority has become an extension of President Zuma and his insider clique. Terrible for a country that is trying to uphold the rule of law. Now we see in Tlokwe, for the second time, the IEC is being taken to the Electoral Court for allegedly manipulating electoral processes. And this time, very seriously, by-elections. Now, if for the second time the IEC is found by the Electoral Court to be guilty of manipulating electoral processes in favour of the ANC, you can understand what a crisis our democracy faces. But I've seen it in the Judicial Service Commission, I've seen it everywhere, how the ANC sees those critical independent institutions as an extension of Jacob Zuma and his insider clique. So South Africa is in a race against time to save our democracy. And we haven't got the luxury to potter about until people feel it's okay to vote for an alternative. We have to take bold moves to convince people that it's okay to be DA. It's okay to vote DA. In fact, not only is it okay, it is essential for our democracy.
Go ahead, Sam.
Kaya Kamala here from...
Are you Kaya Kamala? My radio buddy.
I just wanted to know, regarding the federal executive, any idea as to when is it convening just to try and mitigate the situation? Thank you.
I think we have a FedEx telecon at lunchtime today. So obviously last night I spoke to each of the provincial leaders, or as many as I could reach last night. I couldn't reach everyone, but I communicated then with them in writing. But today we will have a federal executive telecon for an update, and then we can always meet each other electronically, which we do very regularly.
There's a hand at the back. Please go ahead.
Sorry, we'll just keep it I'm Janice King from the British Future Update. Marcella, if you allow me to, just very short questions.
Wil je in Afrikaans vra?
Afrikaans.
Yes. Okay. No, I thought your viewers might want Afrikaans.
Well, if you would answer Afrikaans, that would be great.
With pleasure.
I've been following the tweets online because...
Nee, nou moet jy in Afrikaans vra.
Ek het die tweets gevolg van die ander perskonferensie wat die oomblik aan die gang is van Dr. Impellas.
Aan die AGANG is?
Ja. En een van die goed wat sy gesê het is dat AGANG is soos die enigste party wat nie van oor 'n political baggage het nie. Ek sal graag een mening daaroor kry. En aan die tweede plek het hy gesê dat as die perskonferensie afgestel was verlede Dinsdag, sou dit 'n 10 minute vernedering gewees het. Beskou jy wat nou gebeur het as 'n groot vernedering vir die party? En laastens, in die mening, wat is die toekoms van AGANG in Suid-Afrika? In Suid-Afrikaanse politiek?
Ek is van mening dat AGANG se doodsklokkie gelei het na hierdie laaste week. Daar is geen twyfel daaromtrent nie. Jy weet, het is een ding om geen politieke bagasie te hê, maar Dr. Rampile het nogal baie. Maar jy moet politieke ervaring hê. Om nie die verskil te kan weet tussen 'n persverklaring en 'n persberig nie, is nogal 'n taamlike naïewe fout. En dus, as jy nie 'n lang pad kom in die politiek, is dit bitter moeilik om die druk en die besluite onder druk te besef nie. Dit is 'n ongelooflik moeilike terrein om in te beweeg. En ek dink sy was nie daarvoor voorbereid nie. Dis een ding om die vice-kanselier van 'n universiteit te wees of selfs die uitvoerende direkteur van die Wêreldbank, maar die politiek is iets heeltemal anders. Nou, uit die aard van die saak sou ek hierdie ding wou vermy het, en dit is 'n vernedering uit die aard van die saak. Maar as jy niks waag nie, kan jy ook niks wen nie. Jy moet iets kan waag in die politiek. Jy moet risiko's loop. As ons nooit risiko's geloop het nie, sou ons nog 'n 1,7% party gewees het. Van daardie risiko's het baie goed uitgewerk, ander nie. Ek is baie bly dat ons gelukkig hierdie dubbelpratery in 1 week agtergekom het en halt geroep het. En nou gaan ons voort. As jy 'n fout begaan, moet jy dit erken, dan gaan jy aan, jy leer die lesse.
Okay, baie dankie, Helen.
Can I just
Yes, go ahead.
Priscilla, could you perhaps be able to give me your impressions of what are the political objectives of Impella to initiate talks back away? What do you make of the whole situation? Number one. Number two, do you not think that because you said you take responsibility for this particular decision, and by your own admission you say that the DA is growing and it represents the most blacks apart from the DA. Don't you think it's your responsibility to step down as the DA leader for this failure to lead and to have the foresight to anticipate some sort of mess up that has now materialized?
Let me say that it's very difficult to anticipate in politics always what is going to happen. There's a great phrase that says stuff happens. It's actually phrased a different way, but you're all polite people, and so I wouldn't go into that.
5 left.
You can't possibly be a political leader and not take risks. You have to take risks. And especially if the risks are in the interests of growing the party quickly enough to save the country from becoming a failed state. Because if all our institutions are colonized by the clique surrounding Jacob Zuma, we will end up in a failed state. If the courts become an extension of the president and his insider clique, if the police become an extension of the president and his insider clique, if the prosecuting authority does, if the Independent Electoral Commission does, we're a failed state. So my job is to grow the DA as quickly as we possibly can on a principled basis to prevent that and to offer a new government. And in doing so, we have to take risks. I could say, well, let's wait 40 years. 40 years is far too long. We have to do this by 2019. Impella has a big brand, a good record. She has an absolutely impeccable struggle pedigree. And if she got up and said, I now realize what South Africa faces, which she does, I now realize that bold moves are necessary to build one big, strong, viable alternative. I'm now taking the step to show everyone that this is okay for them too. It would have been magnificent. And everything she said showed me that she really believed what I've just said, that she really believed it, and that she really wanted to do it. She's been on again, off again for a long time, because I think she keeps on getting advice from people, and so wavers. And I get lots of advice from people, mostly unsolicited, and in the end you've got to listen to that advice, talk to the people whose advice you really trust, and make a bold decision. That doesn't guarantee it will always work, but you can't have an on-again, off-again process. Now, I've been amazed at that characteristic in Impella because I've never seen it before. I've worked with her for years and years and years, and she's decisive, she's determined, to the point of sometimes being absolutely ruthless in following through her decisions. So this is a completely new character trait, and I've never noticed it before. And yes, I took a risk. Most certainly, I'm always at the behest of the party, and the party must decide who their leader should be.
Let me just say that the issue of Dr. Impellas' presidential candidacy was discussed at our FedEx. It was a robust discussion. A vote took place. Some people opposed it. We got more than 2/3 in support of it. Once that vote is taken, the DA stands in unity against the leader's role. And we stood in unity then, and we stand in unity now. So let's be very, very clear that this leadership considers Helen Zille's management and handling of Dr. Impellas' presidential candidacy as a risk that had behind it the knowledge and the insight that it was a risk worth taking, and Helen Zille did it with sophistication. And so we stand behind her now. So is there any further questions?
Yes, just one last question to my business day. I'm of the view that with the move last week bringing Ms. Rampele in, you sort of introduced the race narrative in your election story. And you'll be faced with a situation whereby when you choose the next candidate, that person will be judged against Ms. Rampele. That is that person black? Do they have a global profile? Do they have a struggle pedigree? And whoever it becomes, if they're black, then they're a compromised candidate. If they are white, then, well, blacks are not good enough. How are you getting to get yourself out of this mess?
Stuma, I have to smile when you say we introduce a race narrative. We can't do a single thing without hundreds and thousands of people playing the race card one way or the other. And you can't win. You know, everything gets reduced to race. What we want in the DA is diversity. And what this has told me is that we must stand firm, that we've always been right to say, let's look at fitness for purpose and let's get beyond race. And this has reinforced that position for me.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me close this press conference by saying that the Democratic Alliance has gone through this very, very difficult matter over the last week, and we've come to a very clear decision, and we share that decision and its reasons with you today, and we are now putting it behind us, because our job is to contest the elections coming up, and we're now going to fly in unison in order to make our offer known to the voters. So it's time to begin the campaign. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks very much.
Now that is the DA conference here in Rosebank, Johannesburg, announcing, of course, that the breakup between AGANG SA's leader, Ramphele Maphela, and, of course, the DA. We'll take a break and we'll be right back.